Aloha, and thank you for joining us today on Hope in Recovery. My name is Sunny Algoso. I'm a certified peer specialist, and today is my very first mini-series show dealing with or talking about mental health in Hawaii. Being that this is today's grand opening, I should say, for my mini series. There's a lot of issues regarding mental health, drug addiction, trauma, and especially with the health cut budgets. And today I have a very special guest. Her name is Maria Grams, who I am so pleased to have on my show. And she is with Mental Health Association of Hawaii, and she is the executive director, and she will be telling us her story about her recovery. So, Maria, would you like to introduce yourself and just tell us a little about what you would like to talk to the public about with your mental illness?
Sure. Well, I think, it's important for people to learn about other people's stories, and we all have a story. And I think mental illness and mental health is like a continuum, and there are people at one end of the continuum of mental health and mental wellness, and then there are people at the other end of the continuum of mental illness. And we move back and forth, many of us. I mean, all of us. Every day is different, every year is different, and I, for one, have had some very serious episodes of mental illness. So I think it's good for people to learn about some of us who have undergone these serious problems, but have recovered. And I wouldn't say have recovered, I'd say in recovery.
In recovery.
Because it's never over. You're never done. You're always working with your challenges. But what happened to me, I guess when my life changed, and there's like a before and an after, when my life changed was when I was 17. And I had grown up with a lot of hard times because my father was seriously mentally ill. He suffered from severe depression. He was suicidal a lot. He was also violent a lot. And he beat my mother up frequently. But he was kind of a Jekyll Hyde character. So sometimes he was very, very loving and very wonderful and very magical. And then other times he was this monster. And that's very hard for a child, for any child. Sometimes when I hear about a parent who's just all bad, I think that's easier. I mean, none of it's easy.
Exactly.
But I was devastated by growing up with this violence, growing up with this unpredictability, not knowing if my mother would be dead or alive, in the morning, and having none of it spoken about. It was all secret. When I was growing up, I'm 63, when I was growing up, there was no term called domestic violence. Nobody knew much about mental illness. It wasn't talked about. Certainly you didn't talk about suicide. I mean, you didn't talk about any of this stuff. I would go to school and pretend everything was all right. But when I was 17, it began to fall apart for me, and I think what set it off was my father made an actual serious suicide attempt, and he was hospitalized, and something kind of snapped in me. I think I had had all these defenses all these years that nothing really would happen, and then one day it really did happen. And so I graduated from high school, and the summer before I was to leave for college, I was very depressed. But I didn't understand it. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know exactly what. But I knew I was afraid of going away to college. And I was going away very far. I was going 3,000 miles away. And I knew I was scared, but I didn't know what to do about it. And I got more and more depressed, and then I left for college, and I had a complete breakdown. I got to college, and I just immediately fell apart. I got so scared and so terrified, I couldn't eat, and I couldn't sleep. I couldn't, listen to the professors. I was in a state of terror. And I immediately went from there to feeling like I couldn't go to college. I couldn't make it in college, so I was a failure. So I had to kill myself. So I had just this total breakdown, and I remember they sent me to a psychiatrist. I was 17, and I walked into the psychiatrist's office, and I sat down, I started crying, and I said, my father beats my mother. Because that violence had been so traumatic to live with and so horrifying, and it was just so on my mind, and I felt guilty about leaving my little brother and sister, who were very small. At any rate, they had to send me home. I mean, I just was completely non-functional, and I was suicidal. So I came home, and I ended up in a mental hospital, where I lived for 10 months.
Can I ask you this?
Yeah.
Now, you're talking about the age of 17 going
Mm-hmm.
to college.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a local native?
No, I was growing up in Maryland.
Okay, so you're from...
I was in Maryland, and I
All
went
right.
away to Oregon. I went 3,000 miles away to Oregon to
Okay,
college.
all right.
And then I got shipped back to Maryland, and I went into a hospital. And I remember waking up saying, oh my God, I'm in a mental hospital. I'm 17 and I'm in a mental hospital. I'm a mental patient. I'm emotionally disturbed, you know. I mean, I was just, but mostly I wanted to kill myself. That's mostly what I wanted to do, because I was a failure. I couldn't think, I couldn't read, I couldn't eat. I was tortured, absolutely tortured. And at one weekend, and I think this might be common with teenagers, I didn't know how psychiatry worked, but what I thought was that the psychiatrist should know what you're thinking in order to help you. So I decided to test the psychiatrist to see if he could really help me. And if he couldn't help me, then I was doomed and I had to kill myself. So my plan was I would get home on a weekend pass and I was gonna commit suicide. But I would lie, and if the psychiatrist could tell I was lying, then there was hope for me, because he would know what I was thinking. He'd be able to help me. So I said, I want to go home this weekend. And he said, well, are you going to be okay? And I said, yeah. He said, you're not going to try to kill yourself? I said, no, And he said, okay, I'll write you the pass. So my fate was sealed. He couldn't help me. Nobody could help me.
Oh my goodness.
So I went home and I took sleeping pills and I slit my wrist. And it didn't work. You know, I didn't die.
Wow.
So I woke my parents up. They took me back to the hospital, and over the next many months, I started gradually getting better, and I got a job as a waitress. I was able to function a little bit. My terror and my depression and my just, you know, the fear that was unceasing, it started abating a little bit. And so the next summer, you know, this was September when I'd gone in the hospital, and I think it was maybe October when I attempted suicide. By the next summer, I was well enough to be out of the hospital.
So did you spend, like, was it a year?
Yeah, it was 10 months.
Wow.
It was a long time. It was a really long time. But it was a very good hospital. I mean, it was a very enlightened hospital that treated me very well. But they didn't give me medication, because this is 1963 and there wasn't a lot of medication. But I kept taking it as a sign they didn't really believe me, that I was so depressed. But at any rate, so I got out of the hospital. It took me 10 years to get through college, because I could only go part-time and I would work. And I continued to have a lot of trouble, a lot of, you know, coming in and out of having my symptoms of anxiety and depression, and kind of falling apart and getting suicidal. But about 3 or 4 years later, a doctor gave me some pills, and he gave me an antidepressant and an anti-anxiety pill, 2 pills. And for the first time, I felt my symptoms stop. For the first time, I didn't have to go down. It was like a miracle. It was like, wow. Oh my God, this can stop. I don't have to be hospitalized again. And gradually I stayed better and better and better, but I always stayed in therapy. You know, I stayed in therapy for years and years and years and years. So I eventually graduated from college. I got married. I had a child. I started graduate school in psychology. And I got divorced.
Okay.
And I was still okay. You know, life was, it wasn't like I had an easy time of it. I had a lot of mood swings. I struggled with depression, but I didn't have any more breakdowns that were so severe that I had to be hospitalized, that I wanted to kill myself. So like in this way, 16 years have elapsed, and I have a little baby, and I'm in graduate school, and I get my master's degree, and I start working, and I'm a single mother, and then I fall in love. And so now I'm about 30, and or 32, somewhere in there. And then tragedy hit me again, and it was like a snap, because the person I was with, who I was just madly in love with, there was a very sudden breakup that I had no idea was coming. I mean, I thought this was it. I'm living happily ever after. I found the person of my dreams, and all of a sudden it was over. And you know what? I cracked again. All the symptoms flooded back, as if I had never been okay. So the severe anxiety where I can't eat, I can't sleep, I'm throwing up all the time, I'm in a state of terror, the depression, the inability to concentrate on anything, not read, not work, not be able to go to the grocery store. All of that came back in a flash. And I tried therapy. And then I said, okay, this was really funny. I said, I need these 2 pills because this helped me 10, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever. And nobody would give me these pills.
So let me get this straight.
Yeah.
From the time that you got your child and things are going well, were you off your medication?
Oh yeah, I was only on medication for a very, very short time back way when I was still like maybe 22 or something.
Okay.
That was just a short period of time.
All right.
But I was not on medication all these
Okay.
years. But then this breakup happened, and it snapped me right into this my previous mental illness.
Okay.
And so I said, I know what I need. I went to a primary care doctor. I said, I need this drug and this drug. And he said, well, I'll send you to a psychiatrist. I went to a psychiatrist. I said, I know what helps me. These 2 drugs. And the psychiatrist said, oh no, we'll give you this other drug. Gave me this other drug, didn't help. By this time, I have become totally suicidal because I just fall into this well of hopelessness. My brain lies to me. I mean, that's how I describe severe depression and severe anxiety. What happened to me is it's your brain lying to you, and my brain was telling me my life was over, it was hopeless. I would, in this case, never ever find love again, but more than that, I was a failure again. I was crazy. I was never going to be okay, and I had to kill myself. And so I became seriously, seriously suicidal. But I knew that I was suicidal and that I didn't really want to die. So I realized I had to be hospitalized. In the meantime, nobody would give me these 2 pills that I said I needed, but I found myself a hospital. I went in the Yellow Pages and I found myself a hospital. And this is San Francisco now.
Okay, all right.
And it's May, and my son is 7, and I got myself admitted to this hospital. And I went in and I said, okay, I need these 2 pills. I know what's the matter with me. I'm having my mental illness, and and they said, no, we think you're bipolar, and we're doing a bipolar study, and we're giving people lithium, so we're going to give you lithium because you're definitely bipolar. I mean, you have all this energy and you do all this great work, and then you have these depressions, so you're bipolar. I said, I don't think so, but whatever. They gave me lithium, didn't work, didn't do a thing, gave me a stomachache. And I was still very anxious, very depressed. I mean, it feels like you're being tortured by your brain. That's what it feels like. And I was still very suicidal, but they said, sorry, our study's over and you have to go now. So I ended up in another hospital. And luckily for me, my son was able to live with his father, because his father and I had always stayed friends. And we lived very close by. And so my son was in a secure place. You know, he could go to his same school. My husband had remarried. We were all good friends. And so even though this was very traumatic for Jesse to have lost me into some place that he didn't know where I was,
Right.
but at least he was taken care of.
Right.
And unlike, you know, most single mothers, they lose custody of their kids when they have to go in the hospital. You know, that's what happens a lot of times. So I was lucky. And
besides losing their own family.
And I didn't lose my house because my friends kind of took care of, they rented my house out. Because anyway, I had to go to another hospital. And I went into this hospital and I said, okay, I need these 2 drugs. I need this, particularly this one drug, because it helped me 15 years ago. It cured me of my symptoms. And they said, no, I don't think so. We're going to give you this drug. And I was just descending more and more and more and more into the abyss. And so I actually escaped from the hospital. And I actually went to the Golden Gate Bridge.
You did.
I did. And I had it all planned. And I ran away. I feel so sorry for the nurse, because he saw how desperate I was to get out of the hospital. So he said, well, would you like to go to the gift shop? He was going to do me a favor and let me out of the ward for a few minutes. And I said, oh yeah. And I always carried, you know, my credit card and some money on me because I had this plan. And we went to the gift shop, and while he was in line buying his card, I bolted. And I got on a bus, and I went to it, and then I went into San Francisco, and I got on a taxi, and I went to the Golden Gate Bridge, and I went out on the Golden Gate Bridge, and I scribbled a note to my son, and I said, Jesse, I'm so sorry to leave you. I can't bear it anymore. I just can't bear it anymore. I can't bear being alive anymore. And then I went over the ledge. I went over the ledge of the Golden Gate Bridge. And there's another ledge. There's the you know, there's the ledge, and then you go over, and then there's another little narrow ledge. And I stood there, and I couldn't push myself off. I'd even taken my glasses off because I thought if I didn't see the ocean very well, it would help me to jump, but I couldn't do it. Meanwhile, my psychiatrist had called my friends. Everybody knew that I was going to go to the Golden Gate Bridge, but I came back over the edge. I came back over the ledge. And they took me, they took me back to the hospital. And when I got back, my psychiatrist said, we'll put you on that medication.
Oh, thank God.
And do you know what? Within 2 weeks, I was completely better.
So how are you today? I mean, this is so tragic to hear that you had to actually go through this whole thing to get the doctors to listen to you.
Yeah. You know, I spent 17 years in therapy with that psychiatrist. And I swear we talked about it once a week, why she didn't give me the medication when I first went to that hospital.
That is devastating.
And she ended up saying, I don't know why we didn't, because there's a rule in medicine that if something works at one point, then you do it again. She said, but the reason is that at that point, my diagnosis was agitated depression. And the drug that I had worked for me before was not indicated for agitated depression. So whatever, anyway. I stayed in a halfway house for a little while. Then I went back to my home, and my son came back to live with me. I got a job. I started working in a domestic violence shelter and running the shelter, and I bounced back into my life. But, it's never far. It's never far. Exactly. And I still have symptoms. And I am today on medication. I am on medication for depression, and I'm on medication for anxiety. But I never... it's been, I'm 63 now, so it's been 30 years, and I really haven't had a descent into those severe symptoms in that time. But it's not because I'm not vigilant. I'm watching every minute,
Right.
And when I catch a little bit of anxiety, it's very disabling to me, because it says to me, you're going to have a nervous breakdown. So I have to catch it.
So you have how like to give people the message of coping. What's a really good coping mechanism that you use to let yourself know I just might get to a nervous breakdown?
Well, one of the things that I keep trying to say to myself when I'm having a little depression,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm having anxiety, which is really fear.
Mm-hmm.
It's fear.
Yes.
Like
yes.
I can't do this. Or I'm not a strong person, and it undermines you very deeply.
Yes.
And you can't do all those important things you have to do in your job when you're feeling like a worm.
Right.
And what I try to say to myself, today is the same as yesterday. Yesterday I felt good. I didn't feel depressed and I didn't feel scared. There's nothing different today. So it's not it's not about the reality around me. There's not a truth in that. It's something inside of me that's telling me to be scared, or telling me, life is bad, I should be depressed. So I try to talk to myself, but I really believe in medication. And I work with psychiatrists to tweak it all the time. And medications wear off, antidepressants wear off, and you have to get new antidepressants, or you have to get different dosages, and you got to get little different combinations. And so I'm always working on medications. I go to therapy when I'm feeling like there are things I need to work out,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's about my relationships or it's about stress or whatever. And I talk. I tell people how I'm feeling, and I try to be really open about it, because if you bottle it up, it eats away at you and it gets worse. So I really try to tell people in my office, I'm having a bad day, or, stresses are getting bad, or, I tell about what I've been through, because it's good for me to talk about it, and I think it's helpful for people to know that, hey, this is what an ex-mental patient looks like.
And anybody can look so normal, so beautiful, like you. And
like you.
thank you. And be in society and function.
Mm-hmm.
So, Imari, I gotta thank you, for being able to be so brave to tell your story to many people out here in our community that are struggling, and saying that, maybe I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have no hope.
It's so important to not have shame. For me to not feel shame that I tried to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, there were many decades when I didn't tell anybody that. I mean, that was my last shameful secret. My first secret was my father beat my mother up. My second secret was that I was a mental patient. But my third and longest secret was that I tried to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. But I refused to feel shameful about it, to feel ashamed about it. I've had a mental illness, and I have survived, and I'm going to hopefully keep continuing to survive. And, I'm going to tell everybody, and then maybe somebody out there who's suffering will say, okay, I can get through this too.
Exactly. And all we can do is give people hope. Give people hope that recovery is possible.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Because I myself have a diagnosis, and like you, go through ups and downs.
Mm-hmm.
Recovery is every day.
Yep.
Medication, therapy, having a support system, having a good rest, continuously talking to my family, talking to my doctors. But it's an everyday process, but there is hope.
Yep.
And I want people to understand that hope is such a big thing that people need to believe positively, emotionally in their mind, that we can change within ourselves and be productive.
And not to believe the lies that your brain tells you.
Exactly. And if you had one word or if you had one more message to put out to people, being that this is my first show, Maria, what can you tell people about stigma, especially with the word stigma with mental illness?
Well, mental illness is so complicated, and we have such a long way to go before everybody understands that it's an illness. And tragically, that's what keeps so many people from getting help, because they feel ashamed. They feel that stigma. So I just hope more and more people will understand that, the brain is an organ, just like your heart and your lungs and your kidneys and your liver, and it can get sick, and it can be treated, and we can recover, and it's not anything to be ashamed of. But you have to get help. I always say there are two kinds of people in this world. There are people who have problems, and there are people who have problems and get help.
Exactly.
And you have to be willing to get help, and that's important. You have to take responsibility for that you have an illness, that you have a brain disorder, that your neurotransmitters aren't working right. But you have to get help. You have to be willing to do that, and it's so important.
Thank you so much, Maria, for being my first my first guest on my show. It means so much to me, knowing that we can put this message out there to the community, letting people know that there is hope in recovery. Thank you once again, Maria. And thank you, everyone, for watching. And I look forward to seeing you again in Hope in Recovery.